Nothing is evil in the beginning. And there was a time when the world was so young.
Rings of Power, Episode 6 Review. We begin with Adar planting new life in defiance of death, a symbolic gesture of the elves. Adar then gives a speech to the orcs before their attack on the watchtower about how the orcs have been repressed and they will gain a new home after this battle. Adar marches at the front of an orc army to the watchtower. Guess he can also do the arrow catching technique, or he's just being very stupid for a number of reasons. They reach the watchtower, but there is no one to be seen. The orcs then search to see if it is deserted. The orcs find Ariandir, who has been hiding to spring the trap of making the tower fall. All he had to do was fire one flaming arrow Arendir escapes and traps the orcs inside of the tower as it falls on them. Lucky for him, there are no orcs outside or on the bridge, as was shown earlier. It then moves to the humans who left the tower, made it past the orcs without them noticing as they watch the tower fall on the orcs from a distance. They then move back to their village to prepare for the orcs. It then moves to the Númenórean TARDIS ships, travelling to the Southland. Isildur wakes up. He then meets Galadriel on deck. Galadriel talks about humility.
Despise not the labour which humbles the heart. Humility has saved entire kingdoms, the proud have all but led to ruin.
Oh, come on!
Who is this mortal who speaks to me as if he has the slightest idea who I am?
And asks why Isildur volunteered, who replies he wanted to get away from Númenor, as it's no longer the place it should be. Elendil then informs Miriel land has been sighted, and how long it will take before they set anchor and travel to the village Halbrand guesses the orcs may be at. Next we see Ariandir trying to break the vampire sword hilt, but fails, as it's beyond his skill to destroy with a hammer. Ariandir then hides the vampire sword, as no one must know where it's hidden, but Bronwyn's son watches on. The villagers then fortify the town, rather than run away, fill in the orc tunnels, and arm themselves. Ariandir lies to the villagers.
Our position gives us an advantage.
Creates a plan for their defense and sets the tavern as the fallback position. How very Shaun of the Dead. Arendir this time gives a rousing speech and it works. Arendir also decides to plant some seeds with Bronwyn and talks about being together after the battle. It transitions to night and the villagers wait for the orcs to attack. The orcs come across the bridge as they fall into the trap. As they block them in with flaming carts, they then begin to shoot at them from the rooftops. The orcs easily break out of the encirclement and move to the tavern, and hand-to-hand melee combat begins outside. Arendir gets dragged off the roof and begins hand-to-hand combat with an orc who has no weapons for some reason. The fight with the humans and the orcs continue, and the orcs fall far easier than normal. Arendir decides to fight dirty and stab the orc with a sharp object he picks up in the eye when the orc kindly did not use a weapon earlier and wanted to fist fight. Shame on you. There are multiple instances in this fight where Arendir should have been killed. Bronwyn saves him by stabbing the orc in the neck from behind. Not taking any Galadriel orc killing classes, I say.
Stab, twist, gut.
As this was going on, the rest of the humans have won the battle. But wait, Arendir notices that some of the orcs have red blood and finds that these orcs were humans in disguise who had left their group. The main orc force then attacks from the shadows with archers at the now exposed positions of the villagers from the nearby woods. The villagers are getting picked off and Bronwyn gets shot twice, even though later they only show one arrow. Arendir calls for a retreat to the tavern. The villagers barricade themselves in and deal with their injured as the orcs advance towards them. Arendir takes the arrow out of Bronwyn. Adar walks into the village and the orcs begin to break into the tavern. We then move to Galadriel, Halbrand and the Númenóreans on horseback in full gallop during the day. I guess to the village, but they have no way of knowing that it's under attack. There's been no scouts or anything like that. Back to the orcs breaking into the tavern. Arendir tries to fight, but the orcs take hostages and Arendir gets captured again. Adar enters and tells Arendir to give him the vampire sword. Arendir tells Adar to release the humans and he will consider it. Adar then begins killing the humans as he did not like Ariandia's joke. What's that? Alright, stop. Eventually getting to Bronwyn, but before they can kill her, her son tells them the location of the vampire sword. Adar gets the vampire sword, but then hears the rumblings of horses. He then goes outside and gives a task to the Sauron worshipper. The Númenóreans ride into the village, and the orcs decide to kill everyone in the tavern, but Ariandia then breaks free. The Númenórean cavalry easily starts killing the orcs off. Galadriel finally gets her moment to shine, killing orcs. Halbrand saves Elendil as Isildur rushes to his aid, a subversion of the Fellowship of the Ring. Galadriel asks Ariandia where the enemy commander is, and points to Adar as he rushes off on horse, and tells Galadriel he must not get away with the item in his hand. We get a Galadriel is amazing moment. Halbrand sees her riding off and follows after her. Galadriel chases after Adar until Halbrand knocks him off his horse, somehow getting in front of both of them. Halbrand then stabs Adar in the hand as he reaches for the item he was carrying and asks if he remembers Halbrand, and he replies, no. Galadriel stops Halbrand just as he's about to kill Adar, stating she needs him alive.
Halbrand, put it down. One cannot satisfy thirst by drinking seawater.
With the Númenóreans cleaned up after the battle, who for some reason have captured and chained orcs, no idea why they would, Galadriel interrogates Adar, who only wants to talk about orc pronouns. Galadriel is even willing to torture the orcs to get what she wants, the location of his master, Sauron. Adar then talks of Sauron's failure to create a new power.
He sought to craft the power, not of the flesh, but over flesh, the power of the unseen world. I killed Sauron.
And that orcs are simply misunderstood creatures who deserve life and a home.
I do not believe you.
Galadriel then shows that vengeance has twisted her.
And even if it takes me all of this age, I vow to eradicate every last one of you. But you shall be kept alive, so that one day, before I drive my dagger into your poisoned heart, I will whisper that all your offspring are dead.
Perhaps your search for Morgoth's successor should have ended in your own mirror.
Galadriel does not like the truth told to her and almost kills Adar 5 seconds after her revenge-filled speech, but this time Halbrand stops her. Galadriel walks out with the bundled item. Halbrand goes to talk with Galadriel. They have a heart-to-heart conversation.
And whatever it was you did, be free of it.
I never believed I could be, until today. Fighting at your side, I felt if I could just hold on to that feeling, keep it with me always, bind it to my very being, then
I felt it too.
Halbrand confesses his love to Galadriel, and by being with her, he can see a new life ahead. Halbrand is summoned to see Miriel, leaving the conversation open-ended. The Númenóreans are having a party with the saved villagers. Miriel and Bronwyn stroke each other's ego. Halbrand is introduced to the Southlanders, who instantly recognize he is the king promised from the sigil on his belt. Amazed no one has tried this before. How do they even know about it after about 20 generations? Halbrand hesitates for a few seconds before accepting being king. Galadriel then gives the bundled item to Ariandir, who then passes it on to Bronwyn's son. He then opens it to find an axe instead of the vampire sword. We then cut to the Sauron worshipper using the vampire sword key at the watchtower. This moves a rock out of place, allowing the water from the dam to flow into the orc-made trenches. The water then flows into a dormant volcano, causing it to erupt. Everyone then watches on as rocks rain from the sky, and they run for their lives as a pyroclastic flow comes towards them, except Galadriel, who stands there and takes it head on. Well, that was episode 6. The parts I enjoyed were no half-thoughts, that this was mainly just one story in one area instead of jumping everywhere, and that the orcs made the humans think they needed to use torches and ambush them from the dark. Everything else in this episode was terrible to just stupid. Let us start with the watchtower. How did the humans get to the village past the orcs when the orcs were at the bottom of the path, which seems to be the only way up and down in the dark, so would have to be using torches to see, which would mean the orcs could find them? Dunno. Dropping the watchtower on the orc as they made their way up is actually an alright plan. It would have taken a lot more work on their part, but how that happened from one fire arrow burning through a rope that can break and rot is stupid. The humans did not stay in the watchtower, the most defensible position around, which has a bridge that bottlenecks the enemy to go back to the village that can be attacked from all sides is stupid. At the Battle of the Village, the orcs came over the bridge, right where they wanted, instead of just jumping over that tiny little river. They went right into where they wanted them, very lucky. And Arindir not being stabbed in the back by an orc who just waited for him to come. I would also like to note how many orcs were shown marching on the village was vastly different. This has actually happened multiple times so far. To the morning of this battle with the teleporting Numenorians, as by how the directors cut the episode, we're leaving on the morning of the fight at the watchtower, when the humans are making their defense. So they got to the Southlands off the ship and rode to the village in 1 day. 1 day? When in this episode, Elendil states,
It's a full day's sail into the mountains, and from there, another day's ride east.
So it has taken them at least 3 days, only counting 1 to travel by sea, when that would probably be a week alone, accounting for good weather. Also, how did these ships carry so many horses? From what we see, possibly 300, as that many soldiers were sent. How did they get the horses off the ship when we are shown them being put on by crane? Anyway, to the actual fight. In the morning with the orcs, now being fine in sunlight, instead of literally boiling and melting, the chain knocking the orcs down is just silly, as the 2 men on the horses are holding it so would be dragged off when they hit the orcs, or at least that many. Standing still with the horses makes them lose their advantage in battle. You keep mobile doing charging attacks, or trample the enemy, because the horse itself is a weapon. Now we get to Galadriel doing her silly hanging off a horse to dodge an arrow and kill an orc with her extending sword. She could have just parried them and it would have looked more believable than what we got from an exploding orc. I could go on, but this battle is terrible. Onto the vampire sword. Why did no one check? Galadriel would have wanted to know what the secret weapon of the orcs was. She would have even have been asking Adar about it during his interrogation, saying, "What's this? What does it do?" A sword hilt and an axe feel massively different, which trained warriors should be able to tell. That the sword just moves a rock to release water, which the orcs could have just smashed themselves. That all these trenches were for it to flow into a volcano to make it explode makes no sense. The pressure would have just been released by the hole that the water came out of, not straight out the top of the volcano. I have not even talked about the characters. Galadriel stringing Halbrand along, contradicting herself, and just being an awful person and twisted by revenge, even seemingly going to take enjoyment of killing all these orcs in front of Adar. So much for
One cannot satisfy thirst by drinking seawater.
she would be dead, if not everyone else with the pyroclastic flow. This episode is the worst so far. There is no way they can come back from this. See you in the next episode.